So we're going to do a class on Barolo, more or less, a little bit of Nebbiolo. So here we are in the classic home of Barolo, which is Piemonte in Italy. And Barolo has often been referred to as king of wines, wine of kings. Of all the grape varieties currently in production for really, really high quality wine, Nebbiolo has to be amongst the most tannic. It's not the most tannic by miles. When you're in a blind tasting and there's something made from Nebbiolo in the blind tasting, it almost jumps out at you, almost, not always, because yes, there are very high tannins, but it's a different kind of tannin from the kind of tannin on other high tannin varieties, Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Aglianico, and various others. There's something different about the tannins of Nebbiolo, which kind of, when you've got a little bit of experience, points you in the direction. Also, Nebbiolo, like Burgundy, red Burgundy, Pinot Noir, does not trade on color. You do not buy a Barolo by looking at a few wines and saying, this one's the darkest, that's the one I want. That's not Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo, generally speaking, is slightly lighter in color. Unlike Cabernet, Syrah, Merlot, when you agitate the glass, you find legs because that's alcohol, but not extract. You don't find color in the tears. When you're looking in the glass at Nebbiolo wines, yes, of course they're red. You can see they're made from red wine, but they don't have any kind of deep reds amongst them. Even with the younger Nebbiolos that are produced and released earlier, such as Nebbiolo de Langhe or Nebbiolo de Alba or whatever it might be. I get very excited personally about Nebbiolo. I believe that Sangiovese from Tuscany is the most exciting grape of Italy and the most exciting grape, red wine grape for me of all, if you make it correctly. And it's so difficult to make really, really great Chianti or Chianti Reserva or even Brunello. So one of the things I love about Nebbiolo is it's more reliable. It is that the best producers find it easier, I would argue, to make very good to great Nebbiolo based wines, Baresco, Nebbiolo, Barolo. Here you have wines that, in a way, they sort of present with the fruitiness and the upfront, almost, I hate to say this because people get upset about it, but almost a feminine character. But of course, these really serious tannins that, if not correctly handled, can put hair on your chest. What do I look for? The classic descriptor for Barolo is tar and roses. Roses, that's sort of the sweet smell of the roses, and tar or bitumen, blacktop on the roads, that kind of character. These days, the way they make Barolo, Nebbiolo, it's much more of the roses and a little bit less of the tar. But what I find is on those wines that I really like, where the grip of the tannins is in balance with the fruit and the acidity, the tar usually shows through because it needs that kind of substrate for the wine to be in perfect balance. So the very best of them show some tar, but in the very best way, because otherwise tar say, well, people, that's burnt earth. What are we talking about? It's burnt earth and it's bitumen. It's like oil, slick oil.
I'm not going to drink
it. So I will go through each one and talk about it, and you can see what the wines are.
I can't.
Well,
I can't. People can see, but I can't see.
We will tell you. Then we're going to be nasty to you. We're going to see how well you were listening and how good your palate is, because we're going to mix the wines around and give them to you again.
Okay.
And you have to identify.
I will.
All right. Wine number one. It's Barolo.
It's Barolo.
Einaudi. 2020, and it is Ludo. Ludo is their entry-level wine. It's not entry-level in terms of quality. It's entry-level in terms of the volume that they make. It's the largest volume that they make. Well, I suppose it may be, from their perspective, entry-level in terms of quality, but this is anything but an entry-level wine. It's not entry-level in price, and it's not entry-level on the palate. So what you should look for here, it's relatively light color.
Yes.
It's never going to be deep and dark in Piedmont. In other parts of the world you can get very dark Nebbiolo, but Piedmont it's never going to be very dark. The nose is going to give you this subtle sweetness, typically rose. Then on the palate, the rose, the sort of sweetness of the rose lingers on, but then you realize you're drinking wine of great tannin. But it's different. Sort of, in some ways, the tannins that you get from Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, for sure, Aglianico. The tannins on Nebbiolo for me are like a tight ball. They're there, they have to be very carefully managed, which is a vineyard thing, not a winery thing. You get to sort of crave, for me, that kind of tannin. And to be quite honest, in a blind tasting, it's the structure of those tannins, the way they present, that lets you know you're drinking Nebbiolo as this bullseye of tannin, like they do here. So in this particular case, we know that we're drinking 2020. The Ludo is going to be slightly looser. It's going to be slightly more evolved, even at the same age, because the vineyards from which it is sourced do not have quite the same intensity as some of the others. And this one is going to be more approachable than some of the others. Number two is the same producer, Luigi Einaudi. This is Barolo from 2020 from the Busia crew. The nose is extremely complex with that same character of a hint of roses and then a sort of tar and the power to come from the tannins. You're expecting the tannins on this one. The tannins are certainly there. The wine has, I suppose, overall slightly more amplitude than the Ludo. It's definitely more tannic. Much as I don't really like aging wine, this one we need to do a couple of years on this wine. It's nearly twice the price of the previous wine, and in the context of current drinkability, for me, I would rather drink the previous wine. But I think with 2 years, this is going to be a very, very special wine. Number 3, this is the Kadia, right?
Yeah.
Number 3 is a different producer. Different producer and a different vintage. It's also a very important cru. So number 3 is a winery called Kadia. They make just one Barolo. They make very, very few bottles of it from the Monvigliero cru, which is one of the great crus, like Busia, of Piemonte. This is the 2018 vintage. 2018 was a warm vintage, characterized by wines of quite a lot of power, but not necessarily the subtlety as with all of the others. It is not considered to be as good a year, for example, as 19 or 16. But Barolo is very fortunate. They have not had a really, really bad year for a long time. Maybe 14.
Was 20 a good year?
20 was a good year. I mean, not spectacular, but a really good year. The only one that was really not up to snuff and not to find very, very little to get excited about is 14. Kadia doesn't have the explosive rose nose, and the tannin is more obvious, in some ways not quite as well resolved. That's probably more a vintage thing than it is a producer. But overall, the wine is a lovely representation of Barolo from a very good terroir with a little bit of age on it.
So the terroir of this wine is a superior one?
There are a few crus in Piemonte that are considered to be really, really good for Barolo. Monvigliero is one, Busia, Serralunga. There are a few. And then, of course, certain vineyards, certain producers have their own vineyards where they have monopoles, which have proven over time to be extremely good. But Monvigliero, for sure. Everybody wants a piece of Monvigliero. And then finally, the last one is Nebbiolo d'Alba. If you make a Barolo or a Barbaresco or Nebbiolo de Langhe, but you make a Barbarolo or a Barbaresco that's not up to your standard, or you've got too much from a marketing perspective, you declassify it into Nebbiolo. You don't have to then worry about 36 months, 38 months of aging, 18 months in bottle, or 62 months of aging for a Reserva. You can do what you like with it. Put it in wood, not put it in wood. I've seen so many instances where the Nebbiolo is what you drink while you're waiting for the wineries Barbaresco or Barolo. Or the 18 is something that's a wonderful thing to take advantage of, because the winery simply cannot call it Barolo or Barbaresco because it's not in the right place, but they may have great vineyards. Or they've declassified it because market condition, trading conditions are such that they could use something from which they could benefit from being able to sell the wine 2 years earlier or 3 years earlier and get the money in the bank. Bank managers love that. So I'm a really great fan of Nebbiolo. I'm a nasty guy. I'm hard on people. I very often judge a producer of Barolo and Barbaresco from the quality of their Nebbiolo. If the Nebbiolo is bad or poor, then I sort of say, well, does that mean that all the wine that went into your top wines was really good and this was just really not good enough? Or have you been very careful to give people an entry-level wine that makes them thirst for your higher-end wines? So for me, it's not an overall thing that's that important, but I'm tempted to think that people that make great Nebbiolo also make great other wines. There's no reason why that should be true. It's just a gut feeling for me. Anyway, so this should be simpler, less complex, easier to drink, darker in color because it's younger. If you can detect oak on any of the wines, less oak here. It's the wine where you come home and say, you know what, it's not the weekend, it's not your birthday, but I really do want something very, very nice with my lamb shank.
Lamb shank? What is lamb shank?
Lamb shank, ossobuco.
Ossobuco? What's that? You don't
guys
know?
don't know ossobuco? Okay, well, you have a whole world ahead of you.
Okay.
Lamb shank.
Oh, okay.
Braised.
Lamb arm?
From the leg. So summarize.
Okay.
Number one, for classic Barolo characteristics, powerful roses, a little bit of tar. There's a complexity and a depth, but it's approachable. Number two, the same characteristics as number one, perhaps slightly subdued rose on the nose, but with a lot to come. A more complex palate, but not quite as approachable as number one.
What's approachable?
More easy to appreciate.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that means more delicious?
More delicious now, but for immediacy, not for overall quality.
Oh, I see.
Got it? Sure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
These newbies. Okay. Number three, different producer, slightly older wine, a little less forthcoming, more gravitas here without actually a strong improvement in the quality, slightly more austere, but very complex because of more aging and an excellent vineyard. The lilting, playful, beautiful, easy, drink me now kind of wine, which is the Nebbiolo d'Alba. It's younger, it hasn't been treated as seriously because they don't need to treat it more seriously. They want something that they can add to the lineup that offers people a beautiful drinking opportunity that hints at what they will get when they get their Barolo. It's just a great way to start people thinking about if Einaudi can do this, what can they do when you pay 3 times the price?
Yeah.
4 times the price.
Is Alba the region name?
It's Langhe. Of course, Alba is in the Langhe, but this is Nebbiolo de Langhe.
Okay.
It's not Alba. The whole area is the Langhe, of which Alba is also a part.
Thank you.
Okay, step away for a few minutes, and we're going to mix it all up,
Okay.
and
yeah.
you're going to remember what we told you, and then you're going to tell us which one
Yeah,
is
I'm
which.
gonna read this.
Okay.
So you're not going to blind taste.
Well, yeah, it's,
You are, we aren't.
Peter already knows.
Yeah.
What are
That
you
does
doing
mean.
You're confusing yourself.
Right. How stupid. And that's my pen. Sorry.
Oh, all right then. Taste them all,
Mm-hmm.
make your notes, then tell me which one, what you taste, and therefore which one you think it is.
I see. My noses are broken.
Of all the senses, The one that gets beaten up the first is the nose.
Alright.
To be so careful about letting your nose hang in the glass because the nose gets tired the fastest.
Cardina? What was the name? Cardina?
Cadia. C-A-D-I-A. Okay, Elle, how are we doing?
I'm good.
Okay. Describe wine number 1 and tell me what you think it is.
On the nose, I get roses and tar, but more tar than roses. And I think it's relatively darker. And I think it has more depth than the other one. I think it's Cadia.
Okay, number 2.
Is it correct?
Are you gonna tell us the answer? Or?
Okay. Number 2. I could tell this is Langhe Nebbiolo because the color is darker. On the nose, it's sweeter than others and fruitier.
Right.
And I love the palette too. I liked it. It's easy to drink. I loved it. And number 3, I got roses and tar, but more roses than tar. On the palette, it got more complex than number 4. So it's Barolo from not Rudo.
So complexity is, in the context of wine, good complexity is more things happening, but good things happening.
Okay.
So in some ways it starts before and finishes after the other one. And a more complex wine forces you to think perhaps a little bit more about the wine. And on that basis, right now, you may be mixing up harmoniousness with complexity. This one is more harmonious for current consumption. Number 3. Number 4 is perhaps overall more serious. The additional complexity and potential of the Boursier does not make it for current consumption right now like the Ludo. Right now, I would rather drink Ludo. It's a good deal, it's half the price. But I do feel that Boursier is going to deliver. Ludo delivers right now.
I like the Rudo more, so I thought that's the the greater one.
I like Ludo more right now for consumption. But I don't think it's the better wine. But I do like it more.
Yeah.
That's not a contradiction. That's a real thing. Of course, the Nebbiolo is just beautiful for current consumption. Cadia is structured, balanced,
It's more
complex,
bold.
a little bit of age on it. Really worth drinking, well priced, and deserves its place in the lineup, but for different reasons. Yeah. So I think you did well. You got the same producer here.
Mm-hmm.
You picked up the Nebbiolo because it didn't quite have the complexity of the others. You
And
picked
the
up
color.
the Cadia because it was clearly different. So yes, you liked that one more, so you thought it was better, which is not necessarily the case.
Okay.
So Newbie, you did a great job.
Yay, thank you. Thanks to you.
In the context of the world of wine, we hear a lot about the most famous regions of the world. Bordeaux and Burgundy and Tuscany and Piedmont. But there are other great varieties out there that are extremely interesting, capable of providing fantastic drinking that are not really on the radar screen. Yes, I drink white Burgundy and I drink red Burgundy, but there are grape varieties out there that you haven't heard of that provide unbelievable drinking. Rousset and Jacquère from Savoie, Savagnin from that same part of the world. I want to introduce you to grape varieties that drink way above their station. If the world doesn't talk about them, why should we believe in them? So I'll introduce them to you slowly, because I don't want you to have to take these enormous leaps of faith. So yeah, just stay with me.
Okay.
There is so much unbelievable drinking out there at very, very, very good prices. But what you're going to have to do, stop worrying about what you have in your cellar that makes your neighbors very envious. If you want to have wines in your cellar, and I think it's okay to have wines in your cellar that are the envy of your neighbors, you don't need me. You go out and you buy Screaming Eagle or Chateau Lafite, and you can't go wrong. But if you want amazing drinking and accelerated wine knowledge at very reasonable prices, watch me. You're an excellent student. At least the two wines that you mixed up, we may have taught you something here. That what is most easily drinkable right now might not necessarily be the absolutely best wine. The idea of figuring out quality is not what you like. Of course, that's a very serious part of it.
Right.
But it is understanding what constitutes great wine, and that takes time.
Yeah.
Complexity is sometimes almost the enemy of immediate enjoyment, but it gives you a hint of what's to come. So you chose the wine you liked for current consumption and made the assumption that it was better than a wine that is slightly better but doesn't give as much pleasure at the moment. So congratulations, but I hope you learned from that. That what tastes best right now is not necessarily the best wine. It's the best wine for you, but it's not necessarily the best one.
I think now it has more like finishes longer.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
That's what complexity is about.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the quiz.
Alright.
Let's do Ching Ching.
찬찬?
Ching Ching is Jan in Italian.
아 진짜?
No,
Like,
chin chin.
it's cheers in
Cheers
Italian,
in
right?
Italian, absolutely.
Chin chin.
Yeah,
Is it
chin
chin?
chin.
Oh, okay.
We say also in
Chin
Italian,
chin.
salute,
Ah.
volute, e fili maschi. Salute, health, volute, wealth,
Volute.
e fili maschi, and many male offspring.
Salute volute.
Alright, cheers.
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 Bye. Thank you.